So this week's video is all about how to be a good storyteller. Recently I've been reading some amazing books which have amazing plots and stories, and I just thought I'd share some with you so I could give you some examples of what I find is good storytelling. The first book that I have here, Murder in Lake Garda by Hindle. Okay, so this is essentially a murder mystery, and I honestly love the way that the plot is, because where you hear each character's perspective about what's going on, so you don't really have a narrator who narrates the story. It's just different perspectives from different characters, which I love, and it makes it more interesting. It makes the story more interesting, and there's a lot of suspense. Please let me know what you think about the story, but when I was reading it, it was really difficult to figure out who the murderer was, and I love who the murderer was, and I love stories like that, and I loved that I wasn't able to figure out what was going on the whole time, and there was an amazing surprise plot twist towards the end, and it was really nice. I really enjoyed the book. One of my favorite books to read from 2023 is YellowFace by F. Kuang, and honestly, it's one of my favorite prose writing ever. So the story is amazing, So it's a horror. It's a horror thriller. It's written in a mix of narrative and then first-person thoughts. The story was really amazing, so I highly recommend that you read this book. Now, R.F Kuang is an amazing writer. If you haven't already read her work, I highly recommend that you read her work. She's literally amazing at everything. So I still have her books, some of her other books to read. I do have Babel, and I've heard that it's amazing, and I just think she's an amazing storyteller. She's very eloquent. She's a graduate of Cambridge University, and I think her work is amazing, and I would highly recommend that you give it a go if you're looking to improve your writing. She's a really good template to look at. Right, so I've got a little bit of backstory for the next book. So I grew up in the Middle East. When we studied literature at school, and when I took my literature module in A-levels and GCSEs, unfortunately there were books that were banned. I hadn't actually heard of this author, unfortunately, because I literally lived in a bit of a bubble when I was younger. So I went to private school, and it was just very getting your work done. We didn't really question what books we had. We kind of just got on with the syllabus. But there's a lot of literature that was unfortunately banned. There's a lot of amazing world literature that was not allowed due to restrictions. So when I got here, I heard about F.Scott Fitzgerald, and obviously he's one of the world's most recognized and one of the world's most read. Yeah, so he's one of the Western world's most celebrated writer, and his work is actually so it's very elevated, and there's definitely a whole bunch of new words that I didn't know and I learned. I've got maybe one more chapter left to read. I'm pretty sure all of you guys have heard of this author. He wrote The Great Gatsby, and I've definitely watched the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and I loved the storyline. It was amazing. But apparently there's some of his other books that are really good. So I bought this book towards the end of last year, and oh my god, it was one of the best books that I picked up. I bought this book from Waterstones, and this book is Tender is the Night by F.Scott Fitzgerald. And as soon as my colleague told me on the way back home, I popped into Waterstones and grabbed a copy. The book is basically loosely based on F.Scott Fitzgerald's life and his relationship with his wife. I think because it's also written in another era, it really just transports you to another era, and the whole story and the plot line, you kind of just lose yourself reading it. And yeah, I just think it's a really good book to elevate your style of writing. Sentence structures that I was looking at and analyzing, because they're actually very different to the normal stuff that I've usually read. So yeah, I highly recommend you go grab a copy if you're looking to elevate your writing. The next author is one of my all-time favorite authors. If I was to craft my career, I would basically just follow his career path, because he's had an amazing run in historical fiction. So his name is William Dalrymple. He is a graduate of history in Cambridge, and I love what he did with his degrees. And he's done a lot of written stuff on India. He's one of the reasons why I actually got into reading. So this book called White Mughals is honestly one of the most romantic books I have ever read. It's this amazing historical fiction, and the way that it's written is really quite cool, because William Dalrymple talks about his the time that he took to research the book, all the visits to the public library in India that he visited, finding out original letters and from the protagonist. And he talks about finding all these letters and speaking to the relatives of the protagonist. The book is so beautifully written and so beautifully outlines interfaith relationships, starting from as early as 1819, and it talks about living between the Mughal Empire and the British Empire that time in London, and it's just a story about 3 generations, and it's so beautifully written. And I think I really connected with it because I personally have a lot of people with interfaith marriages in my family, and I just found it super interesting. And the way that the story's told is through letters, and these amazing letters that he found, and I just think it's one of the best books I've ever read. And I think he just does it with so much respect and love for the interfaith marriage, and so much respect and love for both sides, that I think it's nice to see a neutral stance. It's just written really well and researched really well. He was researching the book for over 5 years before he actually started to publish it. So yeah, this is something that I read all the time. Being a history buff myself, what I love about the story is there is explanation of the Mughal era. It talks about the politics of the Mughal era, and it's a story between a British representative, a Mughal princess. So it's actually really beautiful, and I would encourage you to give it a go. The story is great, and the way that it's written is really beautiful. So it's basically like a love story, but it's all actually true and thoroughly researched. Another one of my favorite is in Xanadu by the same author, William Dalrymple. The book was actually published in 1990. The same year it won the Yorkshire Post Award. The book was also a bestseller when it first came out, and I think this is my favorite book by William Dalrymple ever written. It's so courageous, and we really get to know him as a person, and we get to know how adventurous his life was. So it's actually quite different to some of his other historical books. In Xanadu is a travel book, and I've never read a travel book like this before. So William Dalrymple was actually enrolled as a student in at Trinity College in Cambridge, at Cambridge University. He basically applied for the Gallard Lapsley Travel Scholarship. He basically outlined that he would be following the footsteps of Marco Polo, and he was going to document his life and write about it. The outcome is this book in Xanadu, which it's just mind-blowing. His storytelling is very cool because he talks about his experience, and then he talks about the journey, and he talks about how he feels, but then he also adds a lot of history. So when he's passing specific cities, he talks about the culture of the city, and he talks about, it's a snapshot. When he describes the city or describes the culture, there's a snapshot, and then he usually gives a historical background to the city. So Marco Polo was his childhood hero, and he basically wanted to retrace the footsteps. So he started off from Jerusalem, going straight to Kublai Khan's Xanadu in Mongolia, and the entire journey is nothing short of a masterpiece, because the way that the story is told, it made me want to go and travel and write a book about it. And he's a brilliant author, brilliant writer, and he's one of the best authors. This In Xanadu is something I could possibly read again and again. So that's it for this week. If you stayed until the end, thank you for watching. I really appreciate that you spent the time to watch this video. For aspiring writers, I honestly hope that you read at least one of the books, because I think the storytelling is amazing. And regardless of whichever book you pick, from the 5 books that I presented today, at least one will be able to give you a different perspective of storytelling, and hopefully it will help you elevate and figure out what your style is.